hit record. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'll try to keep track and follow the chat. And if people have questions, try to keep up with that as we go too. So Lori?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Can everybody hear her?
Can you hear me okay?
I see thumbs up. Everybody got a thumbs up if you can hear Lori. Lori, you're kind of freezing on and off some, so hopefully.
Okay, well, I'll start talking. Okay, we'll see how it goes, and then we'll switch to my phone if it doesn't get better. It worked last time, so we should be fine.
Okay.
We may not hope to be. Hi guys, my name is Lori Himmelsbach, and my husband Tom and I own and operate the Kentucky Millstone located in Butler, Kentucky. We are excited that you're here with us today, and you guys are in a super special spot because I am sharing with you the secret recipe for my mother dough. So a couple of reasons why it is called mother dough. One, I learned it when I was a kid from my mother. So her mother passed it down to her, and so it is actually a family. And the other reason I call it my mother dough is because it basically is the master recipe for dinner rolls, coffee cakes, cheese crowns, the spinach rolls that Margaret loves so much, cinnamon rolls, and then you can just branch off for there. Like the Twinkies, if you guys have had my breakfast Twinkies, same dough. So this is the dough that makes a lot of those really yummy ingredients. So we're going to jump right in. And again, if you have any questions, since I'm teaching and I can't see you, Kenna will kind of moderate it. If you have any questions, just let her know and she can pass that on to me. It's Tom's videolist. So a big hello and thank you to Tom.
Hey, Lori, you're still freezing.
All right, Lori, go ahead and get started.
Lori, you're still freezing on and off, and I don't know if that's the same for everyone or if it's just me. Is she freezing on everybody else?
We're gonna take a real short break and see if it's hooked up to the correct Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I think that's the problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Because it says your bandwidth is low.
Yeah, I think it's the Wi-Fi issue.
Oh, you already sound better now. So
Make it go to the Wi-Fi. All right. Well, you know how to do it, so you do it. Sorry, guys.
that's okay.
All right. Yeah, I think our issue is that we're not on the correct Wi-Fi. A couple of Wi-Fi hotspots here.
Okay, Karen, I think it's small because they're having issues with the once they switch to the right Wi-Fi, I think we'll be okay.
Yes. So
Maybe. Did we lose her?
no, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, let me switch. Let me re-spotlight you. I think when it did that, it kicked you out of the spotlight.
I think we're back on, Kenna.
All right. Looks good.
All right. Are we back at it?
We're back up.
All right. So for all of you that joined in late, we're just getting started. So you're lucky. All right. So I'm going to explain to you how the evening is going to go and kind of the way that we'll proceed. So the dough originally was meant to be made and used and made into whatever you wanted to same day. But when I developed the recipe for the cafe, I wanted to be able to, first of all, I didn't want a dough that I needed to knead. So this is a no-knead dough. As I started to age a little bit more, I knew making big bunches of dough that my muscles really didn't want to knead all the dough. And so I developed it as a no-knead recipe. And we'll talk more about why the dough behaves the way it does because it is a no-knead dough recipe. And the other thing is that I made it so that you can actually make the dough and then use it the following day. And so I'm not here at 2 in the morning big for you. And I know I've just broken all your hearts because you thought I was, but I do need sleep. So I developed recipes so that I'm able to come into the bakery and pull things out of the freezer or the refrigerator and bake them. And I don't have to come in as early. And so I'm going to teach you how to do that too. So the really cool part is that if you're entertaining, this is going to make it a cinch for you. Or if you want a cinnamon roll every single day, this is also, you don't have to make cinnamon rolls every single day. I'm going to teach you how you are able to freeze the dough, cut your own cinnamon roll, and then every day you can eat a cinnamon roll. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. So this is the dough that was made yesterday. You'll see, this is a double recipe for what you guys are making. So you can see the yeast development in here and how it's expanded. It started out about here, so it's kind of doubled. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this dough and we're going to start off with a coffee cake and we're going to let it rise.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Rising, we're going to make cinnamon rolls and then we'll let those rise. And while they're rising, then we'll make 2 kinds of dinner rolls and then we'll also make cheese crowns. So I'm going to demonstrate all of that because you guys haven't made your dough yet. And so then you can go back and reference the Zoom room and you can see, like, keep going back to see how those things are made. So we're going to let all those rise, and while they're rising and baking, we are going to mix our dough. And then we're going to mix our dough, and it's going to go into the refrigerator until tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And then you guys will reference the Zoom video or use your memory to create those wonderful creations tomorrow. Or if you want to stay up late tonight, you can make some cinnamon rolls tonight too. So first we're going to start with our coffee cake because the coffee cake takes the longest amount of time to proof and bake. And you notice I'm pulling off some plastic wrap here. And the reason I do that is because sometimes this gets a little happy and it rises above the lid of the container. And so the plastic wrap is kind of there just to protect the top of it so that it doesn't dry out. Now I'm going to make a round coffee cake. You can make a square coffee cake, you can make an oval coffee cake, you can make a heart-shaped coffee cake, any kind of cake that you have. You can even make a freeform coffee cake if you want to. So basically, we're going to take our dough and we're just basically going to whack off a little piece. So we're just going to cut a little bit off, about that much. And as you can see, there's not a lot of gluten development. So when I pull it apart, you don't get that stringy gluten strands like you do in the bread that you need. And so that's what I was referring to when I said that this is a no-knead dough. And the reason I like this is because for this particular dough, I don't want that chew. I want to be able to bite into it and have it fall apart in your mouth. I don't want the gluten strands in there. And the way you do that is by not kneading the dough. So I'm going to immediately put this back in the refrigerator because we don't want it to continue to rise and get warm. This dough is really because you can actually, this is a good project to do with kids because it's a super forgiving dough. So we're going to take our dough ball there and we're going to make sure we grease our pans. And so like I said, this is a good task for like the kids to help you with. And we're basically just going to press it into the pan. We're basically making a base. And if your fingers get a little bit sticky, we're just going to put a little flour on our fingers. And so I'm gonna have a little bit of a lip around the edges of it because I want to just have a little space to catch all the ingredients we're gonna put on it. And so today we are gonna play around with bananas. I don't cook a lot with bananas, but I have some in my fridge. And so I thought, well, let's just use bananas. So that's the beauty of this particular dough, is that you can create whatever kind of coffee cake you want to with it. And Tom will get a close up on that. You can see one of the mashed potatoes. These are real mashed potatoes. And so you can see right here, there's a little lump of mashed dough in there. And nobody's gonna know And that's the cool part. A lot of people don't know that this dough is made with mashed potatoes. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One is because the mashed potatoes are going to give some extra flavor. And the other one is in the olden days, they used to use the mashed potatoes as a way to preserve the dough because they kept the moisture in the dough. So we're going to chop up some banana here. We're going to slice it.
Hey, Lori, that was an 8-inch pan.
Yeah, this one's an 8-inch. But again, you're gonna, depending on how thick you like your coffee dough crust, mine's pretty thin because I wanted it to proof quickly. So depending on, how thick you like your crust, you want to just make sure you have a good base layer, and you don't want it to be too thick, but it really, this is kind of the artisan part of it.
So the question was what size pan. So basically you can use any size pan. It's the base.
Yeah, definitely.
Putting in the
So
bottom.
a lot of times I was using a glass baking dish, like a glass cake pan, the Pyrex, and it was taking a lot longer for it to bake. So I recently started playing around using the metal pan, and it proofs and cooks a whole lot quicker. So again, it's going to be personal, experimentation, and really kind of just seeing what you like. Now we're going to do 2 different coffee cakes on this one. Kenna, do you like bananas?
Not as much as I like strawberries.
Well, some of this coffee cake is going to come to you, so hopefully you'll enjoy the bananas in there. We're going to do bananas and strawberry and crumble on half, and then the other half is going to be Nutella. So you'll have to give the Nutella to your coworkers, I guess.
It'll be good. Regardless, if you make it, I know it'll be good.
All right, so we've got some strawberry on this side, and then the banana on that side. I'm gonna wash my hands real quick. Now, in our last class, we talked about the Flavor Bible. So the Flavor Bible is an awesome book that basically has all of the different ingredients in it. And then you're able to see what pairs well. So it's a really great tool for recipe development. So we're going to look under bananas. And it says the season is winter. The taste is sweet. You can boil, broil, bake, caramelize, deep fry, grill, poach. Sugar enhances the bananas. I'm planning on using Nutella and cinnamon. And so, if I am not used to developing a recipe, we want to look in the book and maybe see if those ingredients work well together. So we look, and chocolate is in bold, which means, and it's also bold letters, and it's also in all caps, which means chocolate and banana go really well together. And then hazelnuts is in here, as well as cinnamon. And so I know all of those ingredients are going to go real well together. So again, the Flavor Bible is an awesome book to reference when you want to start on the recipe development path.
Lori, we have another question real quick while you're getting that. And for those that are joined just a few minutes late, she's demoing everything you're going to be able to do with your dough. We will make the dough while she's letting this sit and rise. And the question was, are the mashed potatoes you use like typical mashed potatoes, or do you just boil potatoes and mash them? And I don't know if you heard that question because you froze on my end.
So the potatoes that I use are like what I would eat for dinner, except depending on whether you put onions. Tom likes onions in his mashed potatoes, so obviously unless you're making a savory dinner roll or a savory treat, I would not put onions in there. But I like to multitask on everything I do. And so I will make a big batch of mashed potatoes, and I'll have meatloaf mashed potatoes for dinner, and then I'll use leftover mashed potatoes to make my dough. So if you aren't making mashed potatoes again, you can use frozen mashed potatoes that you had prior, at some other dinner. You can use like a Bob Evans pre-made mashed potato. I have not tried it, but it's possible to use instant mashed potatoes. So it's a pretty, again, a very flexible dough. But in this instance, we are using mashed potatoes that I would just eat with a spoon or a fork.
Thank you.
All right, so coffee cake, we're gonna sprinkle a little cinnamon on those bananas. And then we're gonna bake them and we're gonna put our Nutella on afterwards, because in my experience, Nutella does not bake well. It kind of gets real grainy, like chocolate sometimes. So we're gonna wait and put some Nutella on it afterwards. And then the strawberry and banana, we're gonna top it with some strawberry. So you guys have the recipe for the strawberry. So easy to mix up. You can just like eat it plain. I love it. Well, for those that, I mean, King Arthur does not recommend eating raw flour. And I'll tell you that I eat it plain. Okay, so we got some nice streusel on here. All right, and then we're gonna cover it with saran wrap. My mom used to use a kitchen towel, and here in the kitchen at the restaurant, we always use saran wrap on everything. I think sometimes a kitchen towel tends to let the air into it a little bit. So I do like to use saran wrap on it. And we're gonna cover it real tight. We're just gonna give it a little cover. And then we're gonna go over and check out the proofer. So the proofer is basically a place where you're gonna keep things warm. We're lucky to have an industrial proofer here. So we're gonna turn it on and it's gonna get up to about 85, hopefully. If you do not have a proofer in your house, which I didn't before I owned a restaurant, I had a double oven. So sometimes I would put it in the bottom oven and I would turn the oven on, count to 60, and then turn it off, and then leave the oven light on. So basically what you're looking for is a warm space. So if we go in here into the kitchen again, I know that this particular spot is a warm spot. So I'll leave a pot holder here because I don't want direct heat on my baked item or the item that I'm proofing. But I know that this is a warm spot, so maybe on the top of the warm spot, next to the wood stove. Burn it. Winter heater. Basically, you're looking for warm. It's just going to take longer for it to rise. So when you think about ingredients, time and temperature are ingredients. And so if your temperature is cooler, it just means it's going to take a longer amount of time. So you don't want it to get maybe above 90, 95 degrees because you're going to proof that yeast too quickly, but you are looking for somewhere that's warm. So everybody good on the coffee cake. And that's going to rise for about half hour. So we're at about 10 till 7 right now. So probably about 7:20, we'll stick that in the oven and start it baking.
Hey, Lori, I'm going to interrupt.
Any questions on coffee cake?
Yeah, Lori, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second because you still kind of keep freezing in and out. So I'm going to ask everybody that has their video on if they turn it off just to see if that makes a difference. Because there's been a couple suggestions that might make a difference. And I know the weather's probably playing into it some tonight too. So, and I can't control the weather.
We're frozen. She's frozen.
Okay. All right. Because you kind of keep freezing, Lori. Sorry.
Everybody good?
Yeah, but you're kind of frozen.
No worries. Yeah, I guess if I freeze, they'll just have to ask what they missed.
Right. Yep. And I can hear you now. And it keeps going and saying your bandwidth is low. So it's probably, and I asked everybody to turn off their video. Maybe that'll help some. It might not. I really think it's probably the weather right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it could be. Because I know the last time we did it, it wasn't as much of an issue. And we're on the kitchen Wi-Fi right next to it. So.
Right. So we'll see. All good. Maybe. Because you're frozen again. I told you guys I like to multitask. Yeah.
So I'm actually going to make cinnamon rolls for the restaurant while I'm making Kenna a cinnamon roll. So this is, and this is what I typically do. This is
Hey,
the amount that I
Lori,
typically make.
can
for
I-
a
can I-
restaurant.
Can I, oh, there you're back. Okay, for a minute you were frozen, so we weren't seeing anything you were doing. Okay,
I haven't started yet, so we're good. I said I'm getting ready to make a cinnamon roll for Kenna.
good. Because I like my cinnamon rolls.
So this is what I typically do in the restaurant. This is the amount of batch I make at the restaurant. This is what we take to the market. And I'm gonna show you how, so like if you don't want to make a cinnamon roll every day, how to be able to create those cinnamon rolls in advance, and you can still eat one every day. So I clean my container out real well. I like to make sure everything's all tidy. And this is a somewhat sticky dough. So I'm kind of rolling it around in the flour to make sure that it doesn't stick to me or stick to the rolling pin. And then we're gonna kind of degas it and get all that air out of it. And you can be kind of liberal with the flour. And the only reason I'm kind of pressing it down here is so that it's easier to roll out. So I got my French rolling pin here. I used to use the rolling pin that had the handles on it. And my dough is gonna get to be about this wide. And so I used to run into issues where I was rolling it and my knuckles would keep digging into it. So this is called a French rolling pin. And you basically just kind of like put some weight on it. And it's very easy to use. I do love the French rolling pin. Now I wouldn't go back to my traditional rolling pin, even though it's really marble, it's really cool. And again, I am being quite liberal with the flour.
Your computer for the rest of his life.
Come on, let's get this.
And dimensions of this particular one for a double batch of cinnamon rolls is going to be 12 inches wide by roughly 32 inches long. And this is for a double batch. And a lot of these numbers, you're going to have to kind of figure out because you may not want to make an entire batch of, a double batch of cinnamon rolls. You might want to make like 4 cinnamon rolls and, some cheese crowns. So what we're really looking for is about that. And we're also looking for it to be about that wide, unless you want to make miniature cinnamon rolls, in which case you're gonna go a smaller size. So I do miniature cinnamon rolls as well. So here at the restaurant, I actually mix my butter and my cinnamon. Your recipe just tells you to slather it with butter and sprinkle it with cinnamon sugar. And you have the recipe for cinnamon sugar. This is actually the cinnamon sugar recipe with a little bit of flour added into it. And that's why adding the flour to, liberally isn't going to make a difference. It's because I like that flour in there, because later on we're going to add a little bit of cream to the top of it, and it gives us this unctuous filling, and it makes it all gooey when it cooks up. So again, this is going to be for you guys to play with. This is the artisan part. I can't give direct amounts because, depending on how much cinnamon roll you want to make, it's going to depend on, how much butter and cinnamon sugar and things you're going to use. And so then again, my cinnamon filling is going to be the cinnamon, the sugar, and a little bit of flour. So I've got it mixed with butter first. And then I'm also going to sprinkle some more of the cinnamon on top, the dry mix. And so what'll happen is when we cut these into cinnamon rolls and we pour some cream over it right before we bake it, it's going to give us that gooey cinnamon roll filling. At this point, you could add some nuts if you wanted. You could have some raisins. You could add some caramel if you wanted sticky buns. So, and this size, well, this is the base for the spinach rolls, spinach and feta rolls, and the pepperoni and cheese rolls with charcuterie rolls. We make a roll. This week for market, Thomas Market doing a broccoli and cheddar roll. So we'll saute the broccoli with some onion, and we'll sprinkle on some cheddar cheese. Probably do like a little cream cheese or something creamy in it. So pretty much you have whatever you. And then we're gonna roll it up. And so I do like a nice tight roll. So I'll start rolling, and then I'll kind of pull in as I roll, because you don't want that first part of your cinnamon roll to come unfurled. So I'm kind of rolling as I go. And then sometimes the poor guy in the end, all he gets is dough. I'll kind of move that so he gets. All right, so this is our cinnamon roll. And this will make about 20 cinnamon rolls. And so what I do for the restaurant is I'll cut it into serving sizes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'll cut and I'll freeze that part. Actually, we'll go ahead and do that because I need cinnamon rolls for Thursday and Friday. So then Thursdays are usually kind of slow here. So we'll do 4 cinnamon rolls for Thursday. And then we'll make that one Friday. And then Saturday we'll do 5 cinnamon rolls. And then we'll do 3 more for the following Thursday. So you see, I've cut these into pieces. And so I'm gonna freeze all this. And I actually forgot about Kenna. So we need Kenna's roll here.
Thank you.
So we're gonna go ahead and cut this guy into pieces to bake tonight. And so a couple of different things. You've got a little tail here that might or might not come unfurled. He's not coming unfurled too much. He's already kind of attached himself. But say you do it and it looks like this. Couple options. You can take it and tuck it under like that. Or if he's coming unfurled there, we can take it and we can just kind of like pinch him. And then this is perfect because we've got space here when it proofs that's going to catch all that cream we're going to dump on top of it. All right, so these guys are ready to go in the proofer. So we're going to cover them up. All right, let's go over and check out the temperature on the proofer and see where we're at on temperature. We're at 72, which to me is a little chilly, so we're just going to turn it up a touch. Let's check out our looking good. So we talked about freezing the cinnamon roll. Do then is I will take and freeze the bulk of cinnamon roll. And I like to get a nice saran wrap on them. So I'll usually double wrap them. All right, so he's frozen or he's ready to go in the freezer. And so then what we'll do is we'll freeze him. And then on Wednesday night, we'll pull him out of the freezer. We'll put him in the refrigerator. On Thursday morning, when I come in at 5:30, I'll cut him into 4 pieces and I'll lay it on the tray just like we did Kenneth's rolls. And they'll go in the proofer just like they are now and we'll proceed just like normal. So when we were talking about if you want a cinnamon roll every single day, you would cut this into single cinnamon roll servings, freeze them individually, and then every night you would pull them out of the freezer and put them in the refrigerator. The next day, you would make sure that you proof them. So you're gonna take the chill off of them, let them get a little poofy and happy, not a technical term, but you're gonna let them get happy. And then you bake them and you have fresh cinnamon rolls every day. So we're gonna put all these away. And I'm gonna wrap them up later, so don't think I'm just gonna throw them in the freezer this way. I'll deal with them later. I'm gonna put these in the refrigerator. Now, this is the one that we started with originally, where we whacked off a piece for our coffee cake. So now we are gonna do 2 different types of rolls. We are gonna do a clover leaf roll, and then we are also going to do a twist roll. And so if any of you guys attended the Farmer's Feast, those twist rolls were actually what we're gonna learn right now. So those were what my mom taught me when I was a kid. And actually, she came down and made those the morning of feast. She shaped them for me because she's much more meticulous with her shaping than I am. And we had to shape 150 of them. So she made all 150 rolls for me. Plus, we had a lot of other things we were cooking too. So, and she likes to be a part. So this is actually going to be very similar to the, oh, go ahead.
There was a question that, can you leave the dough in the refrigerator instead of the freezer?
If you wanted to bake it tomorrow, if you're talking about the cinnamon rolls,
Yes.
so the dough, yes. The cinnamon rolls, I wouldn't leave them for more than a day or overnight because you've got that sugar and it's going to start to melt. So I would suggest if you're not planning on cooking them tomorrow to go ahead and freeze them and thaw them out. But the dough can be left in the refrigerator for about 3 or 4 days. The longer it sits, the more yeasty flavored it's going to be.
And just for the record, if you guys were not at the Farmer's Feast, these twisted rolls were very delicious. And they all looked the same. So your mother.
Well, that's why I had mom do them, is because she's a little more than I am. I go look. But I do have a handy tool for those of you that are like me. This is called a bicycle cutter. And believe it or not, I just discovered this tool about a year ago. And there's a little screw thing here, and it gets larger and smaller. And so the really cool part is that it makes things uniform. And so instead of having to meticulously cut 3 1/4 or 3.5 inches for my cheese crowns, I just measure once and then I make squares. Same with my danishes. I'm giving you guys all my secrets. You think I'm slaving? I got tools. Right tools for the right job. All right, so this guy is rolled out pretty much the same thickness as our cinnamon rolls were. And we're gonna cut these guys into strips about, what do you say, 1 1/4 inches? All right, we got our handy dandy measuring stick here. So I think we're at 1.5 inches. So we're about 1.5 inches wide. All right, and then Tom's gonna come behind me here and show you guys how to shape them. So this is one of the trickier ones to shape. So I'm gonna put my finger here, and one part's gonna be longer, and I never can remember which part's longer. So I think the one, and I can't tell you too much because it's if you're left-handed or right-handed, but we're going across like the breast cancer twist, and then we're going across once more and under, and tucking it under there. What a lot of students want to do is flip this over. It'd make a pretty roll, but it's just different than what I'm suggesting. So what I'm suggesting is to go across and tuck it under. So again, we're pulling across and then across again, and then tucking it under. And then if you want to get really creative, you could make a knot if you wanted to. You can make just a single twist. You can make a spiral. So, you don't have to be married to that particular dinner roll. So we're doing all sorts of weird shapes here. But this is what I was telling you too, is that you can have the kids helping you because it'll taste good regardless. All right, so we got our dinner rolls here. These guys are a little weird looking, but they'll bake up nicely. And then we've got some extra pieces of dough here. And so to show you how resilient the dough is, we're just gonna throw them back in there. And we're gonna use them up later. So again, we're gonna cover these guys up. We don't want them to dry out. And we're gonna go over and put them in the proofer and check on that temperature again. Oh, now we're at 102. So this guy is a little bit tricky to maintain. So 102 is a little high, they'll just get done a little faster. But you do want to keep an eye on that temperature.
And for those of you who might join late, if you don't have a proofer, what Lori said earlier is that she turned her oven on, left it on for about 60 seconds, turned it off, put the light on, and just used her oven as a proofer. So you don't have to be fancy and have a proofer. You just want a warm spot.
I was giving you a different vantage point here. All right, so now we're gonna do cloverleaf rolls. So we've got our old-fashioned muffin tin. And we're gonna take a couple of those guys we didn't use before to show you how resilient they can be. Oh, I forgot we still got cheese crowns too. Now here at the restaurant, we like to make everything the same size. Well, we like to, it doesn't necessarily work out for us so well. Sometimes my focaccia turns out Texas size and sometimes it turns out Vermont size. So where I can control things, I like to. Unfortunately, focaccia is kind of one of those artisan things that ends up whatever size it ends up. Same with croissants. Sometimes they just end up that way. So we're gonna make some dough balls, about 30 grams. And again, you don't have to weigh these out. It's gonna be up to you. We do just because we want to make sure, you know, that everybody has the same size. We don't want them all fighting because somebody got a bigger dinner roll than somebody else. So these are all 30 grams. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to make the cloverleaf rolls. So we're going to do 4 of them. All right, so a couple different ways to make your rolls. One, you can just roll it around in your hand. Again, another great task for kids. And you'll see that they'll all pretty much turn out looking the same. Another one you can do is you can kind of pull down the top of it to create some tension. And you see our little piece there, so I'm just gonna wrap it around there. There's a piece of mashed potato there. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the lumps in the mashed potatoes, but sometimes when I'm cooking, things are kind of beyond my control. Somebody else mashes them. So sometimes they don't get cooked quite as far as I would like. All right, so that's 2. The third one here is you can kind of, if you don't have a whole lot of flour on your surface, you can create tension by rolling it around into a dough ball. That one's the trickiest of them all. I knew a chef that could actually do it with 2 hands at the same time. It's kind of like walking and chewing gum. I can't do that. And then the third one, we're just gonna stick the dough balls in there. The fourth one, we're just gonna stick the dough balls in there. And so I like people sometimes the best choice, but I'm gonna show you that like it's a very resilient dough and it's still gonna look awesome, even if you know, have kids helping you and you're like, okay, just put the balls in there and see how it goes. We got a lot of food going on here. And this is actually, I do the introduction to yeasted baking class, the mother dough class. This is actually one of the classes that we sell to teach here. And so you guys are actually getting the whole course. This is the whole course that we do, that we teach here as well. So big thank you to Kenna on that one for you guys. You guys are super, super special.
I think Lori's super special for getting
And
all
this
of our
dough
secrets.
scraper. So this is a dough scraper. We're at a flat side here. It cleans our table off, and then our rounded side is going to use to scrape the bowl and clean the bowl up. So we love our dough scraper. Again, we like to keep things tidy. So we're going to check that temperature again and put these guys in the first one. So we're at 90 now. 90 is perfect. And I told you guys 20 after on the coffee cake. He's looking bigger if you can't tell. So we're gonna give it about 5 more minutes. Check out our cinnamon rolls. They're looking happier. They take a little bit longer to proof. Usually the cinnamon rolls take about 45 minutes or so. I'm gonna wash my hands again and we'll start on our cheese crowns.
Lori, there was a question in the chat says, can we make butter bits with this recipe?
Butter bits.
Butter bits?
I'm not sure what butter bits are.
That's what
It
I
sounds like
I was gonna
dough.
ask the same thing, but so Mary Loretta, you're gonna have to put in the chat what butter bits are and then I'll re-ask.
Yeah, if I had to guess, it would be like just little pieces of dough, toss them maybe. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of trying anything. So like, if you know what butter bits are and you like think this would taste good, then I would say give it a little bite and it might be amazing. And if it's not, then you haven't wasted a lot of your dough. So for me, a lot of the best ways for my recipe development is I try something, and I'm very fortunate that most of the time it's really good. To eat it. So if you make it and you don't have chickens, then maybe find someone who has chickens. So a lot of our waste goes to the chicken farmers. Most of the time it's not bread, but we do try and recycle as much as possible. All right, so last one on our demo is the famous cheese crowns. Oh, I was gonna actually do the other one. I'm gonna roll. All right, so this is what your all's dough is gonna look like. This is a single batch. So I'm gonna, again, multitask. I'm gonna roll this all out for the restaurant as well. So just to show you, if you had a single batch of dough and you were having a party and you want to make cheese crowns for everybody, I think it makes like maybe between 16 and 20. So we're gonna pull it all out of our container. And so when you make your dough tonight, you want to be aware that this is how much it's gonna look like. So don't put your dough in a container that's this tall, because it's gonna double, it's gonna get bigger. So this shows you how much dough is gonna be there tomorrow. We're gonna scrape all that goodness out. And again, we're kind of liberal with the flour because it is a sticky dough. And again, I'm just pressing the dough down. So that way I don't have the whole thing with the rolling pin. Just make sure your coffee cup is not on the table because it is a little aggressive. All right, then we're going to use our nice, lovely French rolling pin here. And we're going for pretty much that same size you saw the dinner rolls and the cinnamon rolls. So about the same thickness. All right, so we see here, it's a little thinner. Here, it's a little thicker. Okay, this is the Vermont, Texas artisan movement. Here at the bakery, I do have a sheeter, which rolls it all out to the same width, which is really cool because then you don't have people who are like, my cinnamon, my cheese crown is bigger than your cheese crown. But in a home environment, if you've got thicker pieces and thinner pieces, it's all good because we're gonna fill it with all sorts of good stuff. So again, so I don't have to like measure. If you don't have a handy dandy tool, I got it on Amazon. You can actually measure out to 3.5. By 3.5. And then you can cut with your knife, or I also like my peel. So if I'm at home and I'm cutting things, then I'll just use my pizza wheel and I'll just cut them that way. So we're going to use our handy dandy cutter here. So I want to make sure it's 3.5 inches. And so I measure it, and it's just got a little bit on this side and a little bit on this side. So I don't want to cut that off and waste it. So I'm going to make it just a little bit longer. And that's one of the reasons why I like this too, is because you can kind of gauge it. So that way we're not wasting anything. All right, so these are our squares. All right, so we're gonna make Kenna's.
I feel so special.
What'd you say?
She feels special.
Yeah, she is special. So we're gonna grease a few spots. We'll make spots tonight. And so then to make the cheese crowns, this guy's, he's a little bit small. So I'm gonna show you how, again, resilient the dough is. So we're just gonna pinch that together like that. Next. And then we're just gonna drop him in there. And you will not know when he's baked that he's been doctored. So all these little bits that are here, instead of throwing them away or having a misshapen guy here, we're gonna just doctor these guys up. And press it in there. And then we've got a couple that we're just gonna drop in there as well. All right, so that's the base of our cheese crown. Now, if you wanted to eat a cheese crown every day, or if you own a bakery and you don't want to get up at 3 in the morning, this is the cheat, so that you don't have to get up at 3 in the morning, or you can eat one every day. We're gonna freeze these guys. So very much similar to our dinner roll. If you're gonna entertain and you don't wanna get up early, you wanna hang out with your guests. So we're gonna freeze these, and I'll tend to wrap them 2 at a time. So I'll put my plastic wrap down and I'll wrap 2 and 2 and 2, and then I'll just freeze a batch of 6. And then in the morning I bake 6 of them. So I'll go ahead and show you one batch. That way, if you're prepping your cheese crowns in advance and you want to freeze them, so I just put 2 down, and then I lay some plastic wrap over. And the reason I'm doing this is so that they don't stick together. So when you go to thaw them out, you're not fighting with them. So I've got 6 in there, and then again, I'm going to double wrap them to protect them. They're going to stay in my freezer for about up to a week. Sure, tennis. And then I just label mine 6cc, which is the cheese crowns. And so that way, when I go to get them out of the freezer, I'll know that they're cheese crowns and not danishes. So then when I want to bake them on Wednesday night or Wednesday afternoon, I'll pull this pack out of the freezer. I'll set this whole pack in the refrigerator just like this. And then when I come in on Thursday morning to bake them, I will put them like this and proceed like we're gonna do now. So you're going out in the night, overnight in the fridge, and then we're gonna put them in the pans in the morning. So I'm gonna put all this in the refrigerator so it doesn't continue to freeze.
Lori, I just want to recheck because we had this question from what you, and I know you answered it before. How long can the mother dough stay in the refrigerator?
How long can the mother dough stay in the refrigerator?
Yeah, 1 second. Oh, all right, my head's
Her head's in the fridge right now. She'll be right with you.
That's fine.
I'm pulling out all my toys. Yeah, so the mother dough, we're gonna make it, and optimally, you want to use it tomorrow or the next day. If it sits in the refrigerator 3 or 4 days, it'll be fine. It's just gonna continue to get yeastier, so it's gonna taste a little more sourdoughy than the sweeter end of the dough. Because what's happening is the yeast in it is gonna continue to consume the sugars, and so it'll be less sweet and more yeasty, which I don't think is as palatable as you want, but it does work. So I would say 4 days max, but if you know in advance you're not gonna get around to it, I have actually just thrown the whole container in the freezer. Like I wanted to test it and I'm like, what happens if I just can't even deal with it? So I just took the whole container, I threw it in the freezer, and then when I was ready to mess around with it, I pulled it out and continued to do like we're doing now. So again, it's a very resilient dough and it kind of like stands up to a lot. So hopefully that answered your question. We'll have lots of pauses, so if it didn't, we'll backtrack to it. So there's lots of creative ways you can play with it though. All right, so we've got our Danish filling, which is actually the same as our cheese crown filling. For those of you that love our Danishes, it's the same thing. I have a huge bag, so if you make a lot of Danish filling, instead of trying to squeeze the whole bag, what I'll do is I'll just basically make a tiny bag here like this. And so we're gonna put some cheese crown filling in there. All right, and then we've got some blueberries. And you guys do have the recipe for that filling. And we'll talk all about how to make it too. We'll go over the paperwork. So we've got our blueberries there. And I always like to put a little bit of the streusel topping on there. You guys also have the recipe for the streusel topping. Super easy to make. And then we've got some red raspberries. And so I just plunk those in. Oh, I don't have a spoon. And then we've got our cherry filling here. And so it's got some frozen cherries that have been made into like a cherry pie filling. You guys have the recipe for that as well. All righty. So those are the cheese crowns before they are proof. And so when we talk about proof, that's actually the same as letting it rise. So we're basically just looking for the yeast in the dough to start to grow and to warm up and to do its thing. I'm gonna put these away. All right, same thing. We're gonna cover these guys up. We're gonna check that temperature out again, and it has been 40 minutes since we made our coffee cake, so it's probably about ready to go in the oven. For 84 is perfect. I love that temperature. All right, and so our coffee cake does look good, and you can see our dinner rolls are already expanding as well. Same with the cinnamon rolls. So we'll give the cinnamon rolls maybe another 10 minutes. All right, so let's talk about a little bit about how you know when it's ready. So before we made it, the dough was probably down to here. We have seen that it has visibly expanded. It's already pushing up more. And then when you press it, it doesn't collapse, but it doesn't like come back and spring back all the way. So it's not collapsing into itself, which means it's not overproofed. But then when you press it, it does spring back a little bit. So we're gonna put this guy in the oven. And my oven is always set on about 360. I do have a convection oven, and it's a commercial oven, so it does tend to run a little hot. So I'm gonna set the timer on this one for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna check it. All right, so we are gonna get ready to actually make the mother dough. So those of you that are mixing the dough along with me, you wanna go ahead and get all your ingredients out. Go ahead and start getting them together, getting them ready if they're not already. We have all our stuff already ready here. In our previous classes, we talked about mise en place. The mise en place is French for everything in its place. So what we've got here is we've got our flour weighed out, we've got our yeast weighed out, our kosher salt, our sugar, our water, and then the milk and the eggs been in the refrigerator waiting for class. And then over there, we've got our mashed potatoes and our butter. So when we talk about mise en place allows you to be organized so that if you get a phone call in the middle of class, you don't, or when you're making it, you don't, forget whether or not you put salt in there. Even as organized as we try to be, the first time I taught this class, I had the students around the table. We had everything mised out and ready to go. We had the eggs in the middle of the table. And so we mixed everything up. And at the end of class, one of the students was like, why are the eggs in the middle of the table? We had them mised out. We just didn't have them for everyone. And so we made the dough without the eggs. And so I was like, well, I learned that lesson. So I'm not going to do that again. So the next time I taught this class, which is a long time ago, I'm a professional now. So the next time I taught this class, we had everything mised out. And it was all on the other side of the wall on a tray. And so I was teaching the class and we got all the dough mixed up and got all ready to go. And they were walking out the door. And I went over there and the yeast was still sitting over there. So for those of you that are bakers, you know the importance of yeast. So obviously their dough did not work. And that was not a good thing. So you do that's the importance of mise en place. And that's the importance of following your mise en place. All right, so I'm gonna wipe my table down here real quick while you guys are finishing gathering your ingredients. And we're gonna come over here to the butter. So I have my butter all mised out. And we're gonna go ahead and start melting that while I wipe my table down. So here, I don't have an electric range. If you have not seen an induction burner, this is a super, super cool tool. It will only work with a certain type of pan that has like a metallic base. So if I turn it off, it turns off automatically. I think you should actually be able to touch it. I'm not going to. Well, okay, touch it a little. Okay, there you go. I don't normally do that, but I'm just showing you, I'm teaching here. So these are really cool if you have kids because they're not supposed to stay hot. The only way they turn on is like with a pan that has a what? A metal base?
Metallic.
Certain kind of metal. Like it can't be
Magnetic.
aluminum.
A magnetic
magnetic.
a magnet has to stick to it.
Yes, yeah, so I've gone to buy them before and you take a magnet with you. But we're gonna go ahead and start melting the butter. So those of you that are cooking along with me, go ahead and get your butter melting. That way.
Induction burners are really good for the elderly as well, because if you would happen, not that you want to, when you try to practice kitchen safety, if you would put a towel next to it, it's not going to catch that towel on fire. And as soon as something's taken off of it, the heat goes away. So it needs that magnetic to make it work. So it's really good sometimes for the elderly as well.
Well, the really cool
Those
part
of us
about here
that forget.
the cool part here in the kitchen is we don't have any, we don't have a huge cooktop back here. So Tom has one in his kitchen where he does all the soups and things, but I just melt butter and I don't want a huge range back here. So it works out really well for us.
Yep.
All right, so you should have your butter melting here. And then here's our mashed potatoes. These were made today. So the the most important thing I want you guys to take away from this class and making this is the temperature of the mashed potatoes is going to determine the temperature of the rest of your ingredients. So if you make your mashed potatoes today and they're hot and they've not been in the refrigerator, you are going to want to use milk that is cooler. So our mashed potatoes are somewhat cold because we made them yesterday. And so we are actually going to heat up our milk as well. So we're looking for our entire temperature to be right around 80 degrees. So we want to make sure that the milk and the potatoes and the butter are not too hot because they'll cook your eggs and kill your yeast. But we also want to make sure that you're not putting in cold milk and cold mashed potatoes because then your yeast is just going to sit in the refrigerator and it's not going to do anything. And so this is one of the, I think one of the most important parts of this particular dough and working with yeast is making sure that you get that temperature correct. A lot of people say, well, you know, I can't work with yeast. I don't know how to work with yeast. The most important part of working with yeast is the temperature and making sure you don't get it too hot or that it, you know, is not too cold that it doesn't brew.
Lori, when I
All right,
was
so
giving
that's
them,
that.
Lori, real quick, when I was giving them like equipment to have ready for tonight, I said like a food thermometer. If for some reason somebody doesn't have a food thermometer, is there a good way of testing that temperature?
Yeah, definitely. Most of the time, I don't really use the thermometer either. I just stick my finger in it and I'll be like, oh, that's cold. Or I stick my finger in and be like, oh, that's hot. It's really right around body temperature, maybe a little cooler. You just don't want to stick your finger and be like, ooh, because then you're going to kill your yeast. So definitely, the only reason we're using the thermometer today is because we have it and we can see where we are in the temperature. All right, so while this is melting, let's talk a little bit. You guys have the same paperwork I do, and it's the same one that we use in class here. It probably even has my information here. I do tell people I run a kitchen, so it's very difficult for me to answer all the questions. If you have like a super important question, it's always best to text me because I can like answer it immediately. But again, I run a full kitchen, and so it's very difficult. And I do try and answer emails in a timely fashion. So my email is there as well. So let's talk a little bit about our ingredients. My butter here is almost melted. I got a little pat of butter there. So I'm going to go ahead and put my milk in. So for those of you that are following along, our butter is 175 grams or 12 tablespoons. And then our milk is 1 cup or 225 grams. So the reason I love to use grams and the reason I love to use my scale is because I'll put my pan on the scale and I'll weigh out my butter. And then once my butter melts, I'll put my pan on the scale and I'll weigh out my milk. And then I'll put my pan on the scale and I'll weigh out my mashed potatoes. And so instead of getting a bunch of measuring cups dirty and having to wash a bunch of measuring cups, the scale works wonders for that. And then also, if we talk about flour, weighing out your flour, we've got 825 grams of flour. And so my 825 grams is going to be the same as your 825 grams, the same as Tom's 825 grams and Kenneth's. But if we all measure 5 1/4 cups of flour, they're all going to be different because maybe somebody didn't learn that you want your flour to be light and fluffy and they're packing their flour in there. So that 825 grams, the scale really levels the playing field. All right, so I'm warming my milk up. So those of you that just made your mashed potatoes today and they're still hot, you don't really need to do this step. But my mashed potatoes were cold. And I put mine in the microwave just to warm them up a little bit, but I'm guessing they're still really cold. They're 62 degrees. And then my milk is currently 135, which is about right. So my milk's warmed up quite a bit. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and put my mashed potatoes in. And those of you that are cooking with us, you've got some time because we're gonna be putting things in the oven and stuff as well. So this is a super leisurely class and super leisurely dough, so don't feel like you're falling behind if you're still weighing ingredients out. And you're gonna notice mine are gonna be super lumpy because they're cold. And when I mix the dough up, I'm actually gonna mix it with my hands. I'm not gonna use a mixer. I do here at the restaurant when I'm mixing up 5 times, but for a single batch, I really kind of just like to get my hands in there and mix it by hand. But those of you that want to use a mixer, you can actually use a paddle for this. All right, so let's check our temperature. We are at 93, 103, 111. So it's still climbing. And it's touching those mashed potatoes. So you see it jumping all over the place. All right, so we're gonna let it sit here for a minute while you guys are making yours and measuring and doing the things you're doing. And we're gonna go back over to the proofer and check on those cinnamon.
Hey, Lori, can I verify? What is the temperature you want it to be at? Did I hear 80?
We're looking for right around 90.
90. Okay. And if you've heard Lori talk about a food scale, you've heard Kenna talk about a food scale when you're baking before too. It's a vital in my
All right, so our
opinion.
cinnamon rolls.
Gloria, can you, if they don't have a food scale, can you talk to them about measuring flour the correct way without a food
Oh,
scale?
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, we can definitely demo that. I'm gonna run and get some cream for these guys because we need some heavy cream on top of them to make them super yummy. So I will be right back. I forgot to put the cream on.
So even though I think a food scale is very important if you're baking, if you do not have one, there is a correct way to measure them and try to get more accurate, and Lori will demo that for you. Those cinnamon rolls look good.
Because we're making a lot of things. I'm just gonna actually pour some cream over top of it. And this is nice heavy cream. And then just kind of give it a little brush. And what I'm really looking for is to go in those cracks. And then a dusting of plain old cinnamon sugar on top. Alrighty, and they are ready. So we're gonna put them in the oven and we're gonna take a look at our coffee cake. Oh, that's awesome. Here's our coffee cake baking up. And then the cinnamon rolls are going in for 17 minutes. All right, so we're going to talk about measuring your flour. We can actually move that stuff over here too. We'll move it over this way. All right, so while this is cooling down just a touch, we're going to go ahead and demo measure out the flour. So if you have recipes and you want to convert things to grams, unfortunately, the first time you do it, it's going to take a lot of work. But once you do it, then you can use your scale for everything. So I'm going to put my measuring cup on my scale and tare it or make it go to 0. And I think a cup of flour weighs maybe 200 or 225 grams.
I think 220.
And so then to measure it, you're going to use a spoon and you're going to just kind of gently put it in there. So the key is just not to pack it. So once we have it overflowing, we're gonna use the flat side of our knife and just kind of level it off. And we're at 130. I was way off. So it weighs 130. So if I were doing this recipe, if I were converting it and it was like 5 cups of flour, then I would just basically take my 5 times 130, and that would be how much flour would go in the recipe. And so the first time you convert things, you have to, I have a sheet over there that like as we weigh things out. Yeah, I think I see it now. It says 1 cup of flour is 135. So there's a a slight range on it, 5 grams.
I think Lori froze for a second, but if you did not hear her, a cup of flour or regular flour is going to be about 120 grams. And it makes a difference if you do that scoop and fill method because you're not packing it in as tightly. So Lori, you're frozen now. I don't know if you can hear us, but I'm going to hopefully give you a second so you come back to us. And am I the only one?
Right. Check our temperature again. Now potatoes.
Uh-oh, we lost her, guys. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can, there she is.
Am I freezing again?
You were, but somehow you went and then it kicked you off and now you're back on in a sense.
Oh, wow.
Somebody asked about sifting. You didn't, you don't, are we sifting the flour for this?
You can. It kind of depends on your flour. I go through so much flour that I don't typically tend to sift. It depends on like how lumpy your flour is. Recently, I've had some lumpy flour and I just have to work harder to get the lumps out. So, as a home baker, I would sift all the time. But in a setting, to be honest with you, I don't sift as much. All right, so I'm going to feel it. Yeah, and this feels like if you feel it, we're at 104, 105. So you feel it. I'm sticking my finger in here and I'm like, oh, I'm not burning myself, but it is warm. It's kind of warmish hot. But we're going to add eggs to it. I know that it's not too warm at this point, that it's going to cook my eggs. And my eggs are going to drop that temperature. So we're going to go ahead and put the eggs in there. We're also going to proof our yeast. It's going to take a little bit of time to proof the yeast. So we've got our water measured out here. And she actually got it in a bigger cup. So we're going to make a little more space. Okay, so we've got our water here. And then I'm going to microwave it for like probably 10, 20 seconds. So if you don't have a microwave, just you can use hot water. In this particular instance, you can use tap water. For sourdough, I use the filtered water because we don't want the chlorine to kill the yeast. Yeah, so 10 seconds isn't enough.
Hey, Lori, can you repeat the water conversation again? Because I think
All right,
it was in the middle of
Except
it.
this, we're at 86. And so if I stick my finger in and I'm like, yeah, it feels like body temperature. So that's exactly what we're looking for. Not too hot, not too cold. So we're gonna take our yeast and dump it in there. And that is a lot of yeast. This is a heavy yeasted recipe. And I developed it that way so things would proof quicker. And I've just found that, adding a lot of yeast to it made the recipe work better for me. So I'm actually using a fork to stir it up because I don't like to do a lot of dishes. And so I'm going to reuse my fork to whisk my eggs. And so if we're talking about yeast, this is actually an instant yeast. You can use an active dry yeast. An instant yeast, you don't have to proof it. You should be able to add it directly to your flour because it's processed differently. I do like to proof yeast just to make sure that it's alive, to give it a head start, basically. But you could use the active dry yeast and instant yeast interchangeably in this. So while that's proofing and you guys are mixing up your yeast, we're gonna go check on the dinner rolls.
Hey, Lori, if you can
And
hear me,
again, we do see,
Lori, if you can hear me, can you repeat what you said about the water you microwaved?
yep. We'll go back in there.
I know you said something about chlorine, but you cut out in the middle of it. And I wanted
Yeah,
to make sure everybody
so
heard
this one
you.
took about 20 seconds to warm up. And what we were talking about with the water was you can either heat this up in the microwave. It took me about 20 seconds to heat it up, but microwaves behave differently. So you do want to temp it or test, stick your finger in it and make sure it's the correct temperature. This was about 85 degrees. And so again, what we're looking for, this is the most important part. What we're looking for is it to not be too hot, not be too cold. If it's too hot, you'll kill the yeast and the recipe won't work at all. If it's too cold, it's just going to take a little bit longer for it to rise. So if we look at our dinner rolls, we see it's alive. The yeast is growing. These are proofed nicely. You can see a lot of visible difference. It just kind of springs back very slowly. Now on these, what you can do is you can brush them with melted butter. I think I have some butter. Let me grab some butter real quick and we'll melt it and brush them. So you can brush it with melted butter and sprinkle some salt. That's what we did for the feast. Or you can sprinkle them with some cinnamon sugar and make some sweet rolls. You can put some Italian seasoning on them. Some garlic butter. We got our melted butter here. And we're just going to give it a brush. And then the ones that we had at feast, we put a little Maldon salt on them. So we love Maldon salt. This goes on top of the focaccia. And this is just bigger salt crystals. And so it doesn't taste super salty, but it adds a nice salt flavor to it. So we're going to sprinkle a little bit of Maldon on there. And so if you wanted to, you could use garlic butter. We're going to sprinkle some cinnamon sugar on a couple of them. And then these cloverleaf rolls, we're just going to leave them plain. And see, you can already tell, like, there's really not a huge difference in the way that we rolled them. So there were 4 different rolling techniques. One which is a not rolling technique. And I can tell which one that is because it's got a few lumps and bumps. But like, it's not going to be it's not going to be a sad roll. It's going to be a lovely roll. All right, so these guys are going in the oven. And I like to rotate things in the oven. So I'm going to set the timer on these guys for 5 minutes and then we'll rotate them. If we look in the oven, you can see our beautiful cinnamon rolls. See how they're doing? It's about time to rotate them. Whoop. Check on our coffee cake here. Give him a little turn. All right. So 5 minutes on the dinner rolls. All right, so if we take a look at our yeast, it started to bubble. You see bubbles? So this is a good thing. If you don't know if your yeast is old, that's another point that you may want to consider. If you have your mother's yeast, from 1942. Go ahead and throw it out and buy you some new yeast, because it does go old, and then you're gonna go to all this trouble to make your dinner rolls, and it probably won't work. But a good way to test and see if it's gonna work is go ahead and proof it and see if it has bubbles, and maybe it was an ancient form of yeast that actually will work. So while our yeast is sitting here, and our butter and our mashed potatoes and our milk are 102, which is fine because we're going to add the eggs to it, and the eggs are going to drop that temperature. Now I'm doing a double batch, so I'm using 4 eggs. Like I said, I like to multitask. So as long as I'm making dough, I'm going to make a little bit more than you guys. This is going to be the broccoli and cheddar rolls for the Fort Thomas market. So I do like to scramble my eggs a little bit before I put them in. It gives them a head start. Again, I'm using my yeast fork here, so I don't have to wash more dishes. So I'm giving them a good scramble.
So in their recipe, they're only using 2 eggs, correct?
Right, and so I am doing a double batch. So multitasking and making more dough than you guys. So I'm doing a double batch of dough. Did I freeze again? All right, so I've got my sugar weighed out. We're gonna put it in the bowl. And my salt. So this is kosher salt in your recipe. The granules are a little bit more coarse than regular sea salt. I do use the 2 interchange. When I developed the recipe, I wanted to put kosher salt in it, so it has kosher salt. But again, you can use sea salt in it. And then we're gonna add our butter and milk. And you see there's clumps of mashed potatoes still in here, but I'm gonna get in there and work it out with my hands. So I'm not at all concerned about the fact that it has clumps. And I mashed them, so I know the like.
You're frozen again, Lori, and I don't know if you can hear us. So guys, if she comes back, we'll make sure that she re-goes over what she has covered. So Lori, basically you have your milk, butter, and mashed potatoes added to your sugar and your salt, correct?
Yes. Yep. And we're just gonna give a little stir and try and dissolve some of the sugar and salt. And in the meantime, our yeast is still proofing.
Somebody asked Lori, and I don't, that if they're using yeast packets and it's 1/4 ounce, how many should they use?
That is a very good question.
What was the,
Let's see. Let's see. So the yeast is 15 grams. So let me ask Siri real quick, and maybe you can figure it out. Hey Siri, how many ounces is 15 grams?
15 grams is 0.53 ounces.
So it says it's a half an ounce. How much is the packet?
1/4 ounce? So you're gonna use 2 packets of yeast,
Yeah.
right?
That sounds correct.
Sounds correct,
Or they can measure it, and it's going to be 2.5 tablespoons.
right? And you can always weigh it too.
Yeah, so the weight on it's going to be 15 grams. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put in our eggs. And like I said, we scramble them a little bit to give them a head start for breaking up. But in class, sometimes, bloopers. In class, sometimes I'll even just throw the eggs in and show people that, like, I like to show sometimes worst case scenario to show you that, like, you know, if you were working with children or something like that, that the dough still works. Beautiful dough there. And then we're gonna also put in our yeast. And by this time, this is the key part, our temperature will have dropped to a lovely 87 degrees. Because we put in the yeast and we put in the eggs, and it took that temperature down. All right, that's our 5-minute timer on our dinner rolls. So we have to rotate them. And they smell amazing. All right, and then while we're in here, we're gonna temp our, I know it's not ready, but we're gonna go ahead and temp our coffee cake, because I know our timer's gonna go off right now. So that's the 30-minute timer on the coffee cake, but I know it's not done. And the reason I know that is because you can kind of see right here where it's kind of poofy. What we're looking for is a 100 temperature. And so we're at 160. So I can tell it looks kind of raw here. Right here, you can kind of see it peeking through. So we're gonna give it another 10 minutes.
Can you repeat that?
That?
Can you repeat the temperature it should be again?
Yeah, so it's gonna be 190 on that on the coffee cake. These guys look beautiful. So that's 17 minutes on these guys. So we're gonna let these cool before we put some icing on them. All right, so we have 5 minutes before our timer goes off again. So we know that our temperature of this is 87 degrees, so it's a nice temperature. Adding in our yeast. So far you should have your sugar, your salt, your butter, your milk, and your yeast. And mine, you see there's a little bit of egg there. There's a clump of mashed potatoes. And now if your hands are not clean, you want to go ahead and wash them, because you're going to get in here with your hands and mix it up, because it's too difficult to do with just a spatula. So if you don't have good physical capability, you may want to use the mixer with the the paddle. But I'm going to mix mine by hand. So I'm dumping all my flour in, and this is going to be 5 cups or 825 grams. And I'm going to start with stirring it.
So Lori, was yours for a double batch or a single batch? And I think you froze again.
Bigger than yours. You got a lot of visual aspect here, plenty to look at. But yours is going to be half this size. But your flour is going to be 825 grams or 5 1/4 cups.
And you use bread flour, correct?
Yes, this is bread flour. If you're home and all you have is all-purpose flour, don't panic. You can use the all-purpose flour too, and you'll be okay. And then again, I like to use my handy dandy dough scraper to get my tools clean. And then I'm just gonna get in here with my hand and kind of mix it up. And this is the part where, I had those mashed potato clumps. I've got, a little bit of egg left in there. I got some floury bits. And it's not super sticky. I mean, it's not like, I've got dough like stuck to me. So it comes off pretty clean. But really what I'm looking for is mixing it enough so that there's no floury bits left. All right. And then, if you have mashed potatoes, there's no huge clumps of mashed potatoes left in here. All right. So we take a good look at the dough. These huge clumps of mashed potatoes. Not sure what that is.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see any big pockets of mashed potatoes in there. Don't really see any flour. So I'm going to clean my hand off, and it cleans off pretty easily. It doesn't stick to you too bad because it's got a lot. It's what we call an enriched dough. So it's got a lot of flour and butter and eggs in it, as opposed to a lean dough, which is going to be like your bread doughs that don't have flour and eggs. So this one has a lot of fat in it, so it's called an enriched dough. But it comes off your hand pretty easily. And again, use the rounded edge to clean that bowl up. Now, if I were at home, I would just take saran wrap and cover the whole thing. But here, I like to keep them in the Cambros. So I'm gonna spray the Cambro. And again, mine is twice the amount as yours. So I made a double batch. And you see how clean the bowl gets. It's not a super sticky dough when you're putting it in there. It sticks to me a little bit.
Lori, if somebody says theirs is super sticky, do you have a recommendation for that? Should they add a little more flour? What do you like? How do you?
It is super sticky. I would not add more flour. It may feel like it's super sticky because you're not used to feeling it, but when they go to clean their hand off, it should come off relatively easily. So I'm saying it's not super sticky because like when I mess with sourdough, like it doesn't come off your hands, but this one doesn't really stick to you. So it is sticky, but I wouldn't add more flour because that's where you get your more heavier and denser doughs. And this is gonna make it lighter. I'm gonna wash my hand off real quick. And then also, when you put that dough in the refrigerator overnight, it's gonna not be as sticky. So that butter's gonna solidify. So it is gonna change overnight. So right now is one of the reasons I wouldn't want to make dinner rolls and things with it tonight because it is sticky. But tomorrow it's gonna change the structure of it. It's gonna be a lot more manageable tomorrow. All right, so our dinner roll timer went off. I always set my timer under. They need another minute or two just to get a little more color on it. I always tend to set my timer under just because I don't want to miss that sweet spot of like it being ready, and I've missed it. So we're gonna give just another 2 minutes on there. Okay, so we have the dough in the container. Like I said, if I was at home, I would just leave it in the bowl. But I'm a creature of habit. Here at the restaurant, I like to put it in a container. And then I do actually spray the top of the saran wrap. Just in case it does come up on it, so it doesn't stick to the saran wrap as well. And then I'm gonna cover it up. I have a lid for this back in the other room, so I'm actually just gonna set the lid on top of it. I'm not going to seal it. Sometimes the yeast can get super happy, and it will actually, like, if you have it sealed, it will blow off of it. So one of my refrigerator units because it just exploded and the lid went up and it hit the shelf and it broke the shelf. Now I just there and then we'll kind of like press it down a little bit. So he's going to bed overnight. He's gonna rest in the refrigerator overnight. And then I'm gonna go grab the cheese crowns. Last thing to come out of the proofer. We're at 80 degrees, which is lovely. And they are beautiful. All right, and these guys are going in the oven.
So Lori, there was a question on the dough. So basically you want to make sure you see no dry flour and then you know it's mixed
Yes.
well enough.
That's correct. Yeah, so then these guys, again, we press in, it doesn't collapse completely. It just leaves a small indent in it. So our dinner rolls. And then the cheese crowns are going in for 14 minutes. All right, so you guys should have your dough all mixed up and it should be on its way to the refrigerator. So let's check in with Kenna and see so far what questions we have on mixing up the dough.
Was there, I mean, they've been putting questions in the chat as we've been going. I think I made everybody turn off their videos just because it was easier and we was hoping the service would stay connected better. So if people are making the dough, do you have questions? I hope you can see that you can be interrupted multiple times while you're making this dough and it's probably still going to turn out because Lori is the queen of multitasking and she's been multitasking the whole time she's been presenting tonight.
Exactly. And my apologies for, this is my daily habit of running back and forth, so.
So are there questions? Do people have questions?
Well, we're gonna go through the paperwork, and then that way, if you have questions and they come up, you can put them in the chat as you go.
Somebody
So we're
asked,
gonna talk about,
Lori,
oh,
real
go ahead.
quick, if somebody asked if they use a mixer, is there a certain length of time? Scrape the
You
bowl?
basically just until it comes together and there's no flour. So you're not looking to knead it at all. That's our coffee cake timer. All right, so this looks better, but I'm thinking maybe it still needs another 10 minutes. So we're gonna temp it again. I just don't like gooey coffee cakes. Yep, so we're at 164. As you can see, if you look right here, it looks just a little doughy. So another 10 minutes will do this guy a bunch of favors. So we're already gone 40 minutes on that coffee cake. Like I said, coffee cake takes the longest to cook. So that's why when I make it, I'm always aware that it's going to be the longest and I always do it first. We're going to go ahead and pull our rolls out so that they don't, and you can see they've got nice, lovely color on the bottom. And they smell delicious. I wish we could zoom your smell. And then if we pull them apart, just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The clover leaf rolls were one of my mother's favorite. And you can pull them apart. And then there's a whole lot. She loved the little particles. Then we've got our twist here, got great color on the bottom. I encourage you to make sure that you bake things. This is good caramelization. This is where you get a lot of your flavor. So if you are baking things and they're very pale, there will be a flavor difference. So you do want to make sure that you're cooking things all the way through. All right, so let's go through the paperwork that you guys have. So in regards to the tools, we can use a scale or cuts.
Hey, Lori, you're freezing some, so when you come back, you were
Can you
freezing
hear me
a little,
now?
little bit.
Yeah, so we're talking about our tools. So you guys should have the paperwork that Kenna sent you, and it has all the tools listed there that you need. And then we're gonna talk about ingredients. So just let me know if I freeze on this one because it's a little more important. We use bread flour here. So I'm a huge fan of Arthur. Kroger, it's gonna be the blue bag. If you don't have bread flour, this recipe will work with all-purpose flour. The difference between your all-purpose and your bread flour is the amount of protein that's in the flour so that it allows the bread to stay together a little bit more. So in this instance, you don't really need that gluten development as much as you do if you're gonna loaf bread. We do want some though, so it's not gonna be cake. So again, if you don't have bread flour, don't feel like you have to go out and buy it. If you wanted to make a whole wheat dinner roll or a whole wheat cinnamon roll or transfer this recipe to whole wheat, I always encourage people to start out with less and then build their way up. So I wouldn't just jump right in and say, I'm gonna do 100% whole wheat dinner roll. I would start out with like 20%. So just take a small amount of your flour and replace it with whole wheat flour. And if you like it, then continue to build up to whatever percentage you don't like. So that way you're building up, and your family too. We noticed too that it takes a while for people to get used to those whole grains. So a lot of times what you can do is start with a lesser amount of whole wheat flour and then gradually build up as people notice the flavor difference. We actually super excited. Today was the first day that we milled local wheat. We got some red fife wheat from a farmer in Ohio, and we milled it in our grain mill today. And so we're doing 100% whole wheat loaf at the Fort Thomas market on Wednesday. So again, we're trying to purchase local wheats. It's been very difficult to find. So we're gradually making progress to that. But in regards to whole wheat, you're going to notice a flavor difference. It's going to be nuttier. It's going to be more flavorful. So I do encourage you to play around with that if it's something you like.
Hey,
Are
Lori.
you still with me, Kenna?
Yep. Can I ask a real quick question that came up in the chat? Have you ever tried it with gluten-free flour? Or because there's a
Gluten-free flour. This one is a bit tough because, as you noticed on these rolls, when I pulled them apart, there's that gluten right here. I mean, you see some of that. With your gluten-free flour, you're not going to get any of that, and so it's basically just going to fall apart. I have done it with gluten-free flour because I've with it and enjoy it. So we've done like cinnamon rolls and stuff for her, but it is super tricky to work with, but it can be done. It tastes good. We did the same thing. We just switched it out completely with the gluten-free flour. So it had the mashed potatoes, it had everything else, but there's just no structure to it at all. So it's just super tricky to work with. All right, so in regards to liquid, we use water. Again, tap water is going to be okay on that. We use milk. We use whole milk, but if you're trying to cut back, you could use like a lighter milk, a 2%. If you were wanting to go, with coconut milk, you could sub a little bit of that. Try that. I haven't done it, but again, I always suggest people just give it a try, and if it works for them, continue doing it. If it doesn't, then it doesn't work. Because I can't test like everything. Fat, we use butter. In regards to butter, we only bake with unsalted butter. We use salted butter on our griddle when we do our English muffins and when we do our pancakes. And the reason for that is because you get that salt on your tongue when you bite into something. But in regards to baking, we only use unsalted butter for two reasons. One is because it allows you to control the amount of salt. So if you're purchasing salted butter from Kroger versus salted butter from Walmart, the two brands are going to have different amounts of salt. And so it's very difficult to be in the recipe. So unsalted butter.
Okay, we lost Lori there for a second. Hopefully she comes out. But basically what she was saying, if you didn't catch all of that, was that your salted butter can have different amounts of salt in it. So if you always use unsalted and add the salt the recipe calls for, it'll be consistent. Because the salted butter, different brands have different amounts of salt. So hopefully we didn't lose her totally. We'll see here in a second. Oh, I don't even see her anymore. There she is. Lori,
Okay, I stopped.
I know we lost you for a moment, so I'm going to re-spotlight.
Yeah, he told me I stopped talking.
Yeah.
What was the last thing you heard?
Well, I repeated your thing on the salted butter to them, so I think they're okay on the salted butter.
Yeah. So that was where I stopped. He told me we were dead. So salt, we use sea salt. We don't use iodized salt because I think it does add a flavor difference, and we don't think that the iodine is necessary in there. It does add a flavor difference to it, so we use sea salt. we talked about using instant or active dry yeast. Sweeteners, we used white sugar, but if you wanted to play around with it, you could use brown sugar, you could try agave. You could actually leave the sugar.
Well, we lost you for another minute when you come back, Lori. On the sugar and leaving the sugar out.
Sugar.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we lost you right at the part about leaving the sugar out. So do you not need the sugar for the yeast to activate? Hopefully she'll come back to us in a second, guys. And I apologize for this, but the weather and everything plays into a lot of it. So we're almost through and we got through all the important parts. So that's a plus. I think she's going to come back here in a second. All right, Missy, we're going to spotlight you again. We're going to get through this. So
I know. At least we made it through the majority.
that's what yeah, that's what I said. So let's talk about the sugar. You were on the sugar topic and I thought you said you could leave the sugar out.
Yes, so you can leave the sugar out if you want to, but it acts as a feeding mechanism for the yeast. And so the yeast is going to behave differently and it's going to take you longer to proof things because it doesn't have that sugar to feed it. So, you know, if you want to cut back on the yeast, you can. Also, I leave the recipe the same across the board. So even when I'm doing the spinach and feta roll and the pepperoni roll, it's the exact same recipe.
And really in the big scheme of things, you're not using much sugar.
No. Time and temperatures, ingredients. So we talked about if your house is cool, it's just going to take you longer to proof it. Proofers that are not going to be at night.
I think we're struggling a little here at the end, trying to get Lori through, but hopefully she'll bounce back on with us. But I think we all got pretty much through what needs to be done. And I think that we probably are pretty good. But Lori, can you talk a little bit now? I am going to hit stop recording because I think we've gone over most of the key points.
So it's just for me.